Any cowboy would be lucky to love you." Cole Walker said it without thinking. Just an honest thing spoken beside a muddy creek on a hot Wyoming afternoon. He expected Emma Dawson to laugh it off the way she always laughed things off gracefully, without making anyone feel foolish. Instead, she stopped working. She turned to look at him. Her eyes filled with something he wasn't prepared for. And in a voice so quiet, it nearly disappeared into the sound of rushing water, she said, "I was hoping it would be you." Cole Walker had survived blizzards, cattle stampedes, and a drought that nearly broke him. But those seven words left him completely speechless. If this story already has you feeling something, drop the name of your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because what happens next between Cole and Emma is something you do not want to miss. The morning started the way most of Cole Walker's mornings started, with work that needed doing, and nobody around to help him do it. The summer storm 3 nights before had torn through the valley like something personal, like the sky had a grudge against Wyoming specifically. Fence lines down, creek banks swollen and soft. 2 of his best grazing pastures flooded to the knee. Cole had been out since before sunrise assessing damage, and by the time the sun had climbed high enough to burn the back of his neck, he'd already decided the day was going to be a long one. He didn't mind long days. Long days kept him from thinking too much. That was the arrangement he'd made with himself years ago. Work hard enough, stay tired enough, and the silence inside the house didn't have room to become anything heavier. It was a practical system. Not a happy one, but practical. He was mending the section of fence along the property line between his land and the Dawson place when he heard her voice carrying across the water. "Papa, I told you to stay on the porch. I mean it this time." "Emmy, I'm not an invalid. You were coughing all night. The mud down here is soft, and I don't need you twisting an ankle on top of everything else. I twisted my ankle once, 17 years ago. And you still bring it up like it just happened so clearly it left an impression." Cole slowed his work without meaning to. He'd known the Dawson family his whole life. Robert Dawson was one of those men who'd come west with nothing but stubbornness and good intentions, and somehow turned both into something that lasted. His ranch wasn't the biggest in the valley, wasn't the most profitable, but it was steady. Honest. The kind of operation a man could be proud of. Emma was the one who kept it running now. Most people in the valley didn't say that out loud, but most people in the valley knew it. Robert Dawson's health had been declining for 2 years quietly, in the way men of his generation declined without complaint and without admission. Emma had simply absorbed the work without being asked, without making her father feel diminished, without ever once suggesting that the ranch was becoming a weight she carried rather than a home she loved. Cole respected that more than he knew how to say. He respected a lot of things about Emma Dawson that he didn't know how to say. "Morning," he called out, because ignoring them felt rude and pretending he hadn't heard felt worse. Emma looked up from where she was stacking sandbags along the lower creek bank. She had mud on her boots, mud on her work gloves, and a smear of it across her left forearm. She looked like she'd been at it since before he had. "Cole?" She nodded with the kind of ease that always caught him slightly off guard, like his presence was simply expected and welcome without any fuss about it. "Storm hit your north fence too. 2 sections down. Lost some post anchors along the creek." "Same here." She pushed her hair back from her face with her wrist. "Papa wants to help." "I don't see why that's unreasonable," Robert called from 15 feet away, where he had Cole noticed absolutely not stayed on the porch. "Because the doctor said light activity," Emma said without raising her voice. "And because I said so, which ought to count for something." Robert Dawson looked at Cole with the expression of a man who had been outmaneuvered by logic and was not entirely upset about it. "She gets that from her mother," he said. The reasonable tone. Worst thing her mother ever taught her. Cole almost smiled. Almost. "I've got spare posts in my wagon," he said. "If you can use them." Emma straightened up and looked at him steadily. "We could use them. Thank you." A pause. "You don't have to help with the labor, Cole. I know you've got your own damage to deal with." "I've got time." It wasn't entirely true. He had more work waiting than he had hours to fill. But he picked up a post anchor from the back of his wagon and walked toward the creek. And Emma didn't argue, which meant she understood the offer for what it was, not charity but neighborly, and there was a difference. They worked side by side for a while without much talk. That was something else he'd always noticed about Emma Dawson. She didn't fill silence the way some people did, like they were afraid of what quiet might reveal. She was comfortable in it. She worked steadily and efficiently and didn't perform her effort for anyone watching. Robert eventually settled himself on a flat rock nearby and offered commentary that was approximately 40% useful and 60% his personal history with every fence post the Dawson family had ever installed. "That anchor there," Robert said at one point, gesturing toward the section Cole was reinforcing. "I put that in myself, 1881. Drove it 3 feet deep because I knew the creek ran fast in spring, still solid." "It held," Cole agreed. "Course it held. I drove it 3 feet deep." Emma caught Cole's eye over her father's head. There was something there, a flicker of warmth of fondness, edged with tiredness, of a woman who loved her father completely and was also very much the person responsible for making sure he didn't overexert himself on a creek bank in 90-degree heat. It was a complicated expression to hold in a single glance. Cole looked away before she could see him noticing it. By midday, the worst of the creek bank damage was addressed. Robert had been persuaded through a combination of Emma's firm insistence and Cole's quiet suggestion that the anchor posts would need expert assessment from the porch vantage point to return to the house. Emma had packed him a lunch and a glass of cold water and promised to come in within the hour. She hadn't come in within the hour. Cole had stayed. He told himself it was because there was still a section of the east fence that needed reinforcing, and 2 pairs of hands worked faster than one. This was true. It was also true that he had been alone for a long time, and working beside someone who didn't require anything from him except the work itself was something he hadn't realized he missed, until the absence of it had a shape. "He won't rest," Emma said at one point, not looking up from the wire she was twisting into place. "I keep telling him to let the small things go, and he keeps telling me that the small things are what hold everything together. He's not wrong. He's also 63 years old, with a heart that his doctor describes as working harder than it should. He's a stubborn man. The most stubborn man I've ever known." She paused. "He taught me to be stubborn too, so I can't exactly complain. Doesn't seem like something to complain about." She glanced over at him, then briefly the way she did when he said something that surprised her. He'd noticed that too over the years. Emma Dawson had a particular way of looking at a person when they said something unexpected, like she was recalibrating something quietly and didn't want you to see her doing it. "No," she said after a moment. "I suppose it isn't." They worked. The creek ran shallow and warm beside them. Somewhere behind the tree line, a pair of meadowlarks called back and forth, and the grass on the far bank bent and straightened in a slow breeze that came off the mountains and smelled like pine and something dry and clean. Cole was setting the last anchor post when he made the mistake, if it could be called a mistake, of watching her work. Emma had her back to him, both hands on the wire stretcher pulling the fence line taut with the full weight of her body behind it. She was humming something low and tuneless under her breath, the way people hum when they've forgotten they're doing it. Her gloves were worn through at the right thumb. She'd been working since before sunrise, same as him, maybe longer, and she showed no sign of flagging. He thought about what it took to be Emma Dawson. To carry a failing ranch and a sick father, and a community full of people who needed things from her, and to do all of it without complaint, without diminishment, without losing the particular quality she had, that steadiness, that warmth, that sense of being entirely present in whatever she was doing. He thought whoever ends up with her is going to have to be worth it. He's going to have to be the kind of man who deserves that. He thought, "I'm not sure I know a man like that." And then before his better judgment could intervene, he said it. "Any cowboy would be lucky to love you." He said it the way he said most things, flatly, without decoration. The way a man states a thing he believes to be true and doesn't see the need to dress up. He meant it the way you mean something that is simply obvious, the way you'd say the mountains are high or the creek runs north. A fact, a plain one. Emma went still. The wire stretcher stopped moving. Her hands didn't release it, but they stopped pulling. The humming stopped. The meadowlarks kept on behind the tree line, oblivious. She didn't turn around immediately. Cole waited, already aware in some cellular way that he had said something that landed differently than he intended. He prepared himself for her to laugh. Not unkindly. Emma never did anything unkindly, or to make some graceful deflection, the way she deflected most things that were aimed at her, like they were gifts she didn't feel entitled to keep. Then she turned. Her eyes found his, and what was in them was not laughter. It was not deflection. It was something that had clearly been there for a long time, patient, deep, achingly careful, and that his careless, honest sentence had simply cracked open into the air between them. "I was hoping it would be you," she said. Her voice was barely above the sound of the creek. Cole Walker opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He was a man who had spent 35 years being fairly confident in his ability to respond to most situations. He had argued down ornery cattle buyers and negotiated with weather and buried 2 good horses and a father who didn't leave instructions for anything. He was not a man who was typically rendered mute by 7 words. These 7 words did it. Emma watched him. Her expression shifted from the raw openness of the confession to something more careful, more measured. The way a woman pulls her coat back around herself after having held it open too long in a cold wind. "I'm sorry," she said. "That wasn't fair of me. Forget I said it." "Emma, you were being kind. I read too much into it. It happens." She turned back to the wire stretcher with a steadiness that Cole recognized as the particular steadiness of someone holding themselves together by sheer force of will. "We've got about another hour of work before this section is done. Emma." "Cole, please." He stood there, the post anchor in one hand, the Wyoming sun pressing down on his shoulders, the meadowlarks still calling completely useless, and he tried to find the words for what was happening inside him. He'd known Emma Dawson for 15 years. He'd watched her grow from a quiet, serious girl into a quiet, serious woman with a spine made of something stronger than most men he'd ever met. He'd brought food to her door the winter the snow came early and the Dawson cattle lost 30 head. She'd brought a pot of coffee and a dry sense of humor to his door. The spring, the creek flooded his lower pasture, and he spent a week thinking the whole enterprise was finished. They'd been neighbors in the particular way that meant something out here, not just property adjacent, but life adjacent. The kind of neighbors who understood that survival was occasionally collective. He had not until this moment said the word love in connection with her name inside his own head. But the moment she turned away from him, the moment her shoulders squared back into their work posture, and her voice went quiet and careful, Cole Walker understood with the terrible clarity of a man realizing something enormous, slightly too late that the word had been there the whole time. He just hadn't been looking at it. "I'm not going to forget you said it," he said. Emma's hands paused on the wire. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear it," he continued. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "And I'm not Emma. I'm not good at this. I want you to know that up front. I'm not a man who knows how to—" He stopped, started again. "What I said wasn't just kind. I need you to know that." She turned around slowly. "Cole, I don't say things I don't mean." A long silence. Emma looked at him with those careful, recalibrating eyes, and Cole stood his ground under the look which was harder than most of the physical labor he'd done that day. "No," she said finally. "You don't." He took one step toward her, and that was when they heard the sound of a horse on the road, not one of theirs, not a familiar gait moving fast and deliberate toward the Dawson property. The rider was a man Cole didn't recognize. He was well dressed in a way that announced itself the kind of clothes that belonged in a city office, rather than on the back of a horse in Wyoming mud. He pulled up to the fence line with the ease of a man who was accustomed to arriving in places and having people pay attention, and he looked at Emma and Cole with an expression of polite authority that Cole immediately distrusted. "I'm looking for a Mr. Robert Dawson," the man said. "I have documents for him." "He's not available," Emma said. Her voice had changed, still calm, but with an edge in it now, a wariness. "I'm his daughter, Emma Dawson. I manage the property." The man's eyes moved over her briefly. The work gloves, the mud on her boots, the wire stretcher still in her hands, and Cole watched him make some quiet assessment that he kept off his face with the practiced ease of a man who made quiet assessments for a living. "Ms. Dawson." He produced an envelope from inside his coat. "My name is Gerald Harmon. I represent Mr. Arthur Langley's land development interests in this territory. These are courtesy documents notifying your father, and by extension yourself, of Mr. Langley's intention to purchase several parcels in the Eastern Valley Corridor, including the property currently held under the Dawson family deed." Emma did not take the envelope. "The Dawson property isn't for sale," she said. Harmon's polite expression remained exactly as polite as it had been. "The documents are courtesy of notification Ms. Dawson. Mr. Langley's legal team will be in contact with the specifics of his offer in the coming weeks. He's prepared to be generous." "The Dawson property," Emma said again clearly and without heat, "is not for sale." Harmon tucked the envelope back into his coat with the deliberateness of a man making a point without saying it. "I'll convey that to Mr. Langley." He glanced at Cole, a brief, assessing look. "Good afternoon." He turned his horse and rode back the way he came. Cole and Emma stood in the quiet he left behind. "Arthur Langley," Cole said. Emma's jaw was set. "You know the name. I know the name. He's been buying land north of Casper for 3 years. Some of it bought fair. Some of it bought with enough pressure that the word bought is doing heavy lifting." He paused. "How many of your neighbors have had visits like this?" "I don't know yet." She was already thinking he could see at her expression, the particular focused kind that meant she was several steps ahead and cataloging what she didn't yet know. "But if he sent a rider to us, he's not starting here. We're one parcel among several. Which means other families have already heard from him. Which means other families may already be scared." She peeled off her work gloves one finger at a time, methodical. "I need to talk to the Henrys and the Caldwells." "Emma?" She looked at him. "What happened before he arrived?" Cole said, "Isn't finished." Emma was quiet for a moment. In the middle distance, the ranch house sat solid and still under the summer sky, and through the front window, Cole could see the shape of Robert Dawson moving inside slowly, the way he moved now, but moving. "No," she agreed quietly. "It isn't. But it's going to have to wait." He said it because he could see her needing to hear it, not as a dismissal of what had passed between them, but as a recognition of what was true. Something larger was moving toward this valley, and both of them knew it, and Emma Dawson was not the kind of woman who put her own feelings ahead of the people who needed her to think clearly. He loved that about her. The thought arrived so plainly, so without fanfare, that it almost frightened him. He loved that about her. "Yes," she said. "It'll have to wait." And then just barely a shift, a softening. "But Cole?" "Yeah. I meant what I said." She walked toward the house to tell her father what was coming. Cole stood by the creek a moment longer, the last anchor post still in his hand, watching her go. 15 years of standing a few steps away from something he hadn't let himself look at directly. And now he'd looked. And now Arthur Langley was coming. And the two most important things in Cole Walker's life had just become simultaneously desperately urgent, with no map for how to carry both of them without losing at least one. He set the post anchor down. He followed her toward the house. 10. Robert Dawson took the news the way he took most difficult news, quietly in his chair, with his hands folded and his jaw set in the particular way that meant he was thinking rather than reacting. Cole sat across from him. Emma stood near the window. "Langley," Robert said finally. "I've heard the name. He's systematic," Cole said. "He doesn't move until he's done his groundwork. The fact that he's sending riders out now means he's already identified which parcels he wants and in what order. He's not going to get this land." "No," Emma said. "He's not." Robert looked at his daughter for a long moment. There was something in the look, the complicated mixture of pride and worry, and the particular grief of a father who knows he is no longer the one standing between his child and hard things. "What are you thinking?" he asked her. "I'm thinking we need to know the property boundaries precisely, not approximately, not from memory, from the county maps." She turned from the window. "If he's going to use legal means, we need to be more precise about our legal standing than he is. I need to get to the county records office." "That's 3 hours each way," Cole said. "I know how far it is. I'll go with you." Emma looked at him. Robert Dawson looked at him too, with a different quality of attention. Cole noticed the careful attention of a man who has just filed something away. "You don't have to," Emma said. "I know I don't." Cole looked at Robert. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to help where I can. This affects my land too eventually, and—" He stopped. "Chose the simpler thing. And I don't like the idea of Emma making that ride alone." Robert Dawson studied him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "You know," the older man said, "I've been watching you from that porch for 15 years, Cole Walker." A pause. "Takes some men a long time to figure out what matters." Cole didn't answer that. Emma looked out the window again, and he could see the edge of her profile, the line of her jaw, the set of her mouth, something working behind her eyes. Outside, the summer afternoon was pressing toward evening, and somewhere to the north, Arthur Langley was already planning the next move. Cole looked at Emma. Emma turned and met his eyes. 15 years. And they were just getting started. The ride to the county records office took 3 hours and 14 minutes. Cole knew because he counted not obsessively, but the way a man counts things when he's trying to keep himself focused on the practical and away from the personal. Emma rode beside him without complaint about the pace, without complaint about the heat, without complaint about anything. She had a leather satchel across her saddle that held a notebook, 2 sharpened pencils, and a copy of the original Dawson land grant her father had dug out of the cedar chest where he kept documents that mattered. She'd made Cole wait 20 minutes while she read every page of it. He hadn't minded the wait. He'd stood in the Dawson doorway while she sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread before her, and he'd watched her read the way she did everything with total unperformed concentration, like the words deserved the full weight of her attention. Her father had fallen asleep in his chair by the fireplace. The house smelled like coffee and pine soap, and something that had always felt when Cole stepped inside it, like the specific gravity of a life built with intention. "There's a boundary notation here," she'd said without looking up. "The eastern line. It references a creek junction that doesn't appear on the standard valley map." "The old Hargrove tributary," Cole said. "It dried up in '83, but it would still appear on the county survey." She'd looked up, then quickly, sharply, the way she looked when something clicked into place. "That's important." "It might be." "It's important, Cole. If Langley's team is working from the standard valley map and not the county survey, they may have miscalculated where our boundary actually sits." He'd straightened up from the doorframe. "Then we need the county survey." "Yes," she said. "We do." And she'd closed the document, folded it carefully, and placed it in the satchel with the decisive movements of a woman who had decided what came next and was already executing it. That was 2 hours and 40 minutes ago. Now the county seat was coming into view on the low hill ahead, and Emma had barely spoken since they crossed the ridge, and Cole had not pushed. He understood with the particular understanding of a man who also used silence as a working space that she was thinking. Building something in her head, cataloging what she knew against what she needed to know, and mapping the distance between the two. He was doing his own cataloging. What she'd said at the creek hadn't left him. It wasn't the kind of thing that left. It had settled somewhere below the surface of his functioning, not loudly, not in a way that impaired anything but present. A warmth in the wrong season. A thing he'd have to learn how to carry while also carrying everything else. "You're quiet," Emma said. "So are you." "I'm planning." "So am I." She glanced sideways. "What are you planning?" "How to be useful without getting in your way." A pause. Then with a dryness that was entirely her, "That's unusually self-aware for a man who drove 3 fence posts into my south line without asking in '87. You needed fence posts. I needed to be asked. You would have said no. That's not the point." Cole almost smiled. "I know." Emma looked at him for a moment longer, that particular recalibrating look, and then faced forward again, and the silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before. Lighter. Like something had been released from it. The county records office was staffed by a clerk named Douglas Pettit, who was approximately 104 years old, and moved like he was preserving his energy for something important that had not yet arrived. He received Emma's request for the original county survey maps with the expression of a man being asked to relocate a mountain and told them to wait. They waited 40 minutes. Cole spent them standing near the window. Emma spent them rereading her father's land grant for the 3rd time, making small notations in her pencil margins, with the focused absorption of someone who had already decided she was going to understand this completely. Douglas Pettit returned with 4 large rolled survey maps and the attitude of a man who had carried them from a great distance through considerable personal sacrifice. He unrolled the first one on the counter and stood back. Emma leaned in immediately. Cole leaned in beside her. The survey was dated 1871 pre-statehood most of the settlement in the Eastern Valley. The property lines were drawn in a different hand than the modern maps with different reference points, and the old Hargrove tributary was there exactly as Cole had said, running a diagonal through the eastern boundary of what was now Dawson land. Emma's finger traced the line. "There," she said quietly. The Dawson eastern boundary, according to the 1871 survey, extended 14 yards farther than the standard valley map suggested. 14 yards that, depending on how Arthur Langley's legal team had drawn their intended acquisition lines, might fall inside or outside his claimed corridor. "It's not enormous," Cole said. "It doesn't need to be enormous. It needs to be accurate." She was already copying the relevant coordinates into her notebook, precise and rapid. If his documents are based on the incorrect boundary, they're legally defective. That doesn't stop him, but it slows him. It gives other families time to check their own surveys. She paused. How many families in the Eastern Corridor, Cole? How many parcels that could be affected? He thought about it. 7, maybe 8, depending on how wide his acquisition corridor runs. Are there other families whose boundaries reference that same tributary? The Henrys for certain. Probably the Caldwells. Possibly the Mercer widow. Her husband's grant was filed the same year as Dawson. Emma finished her notation and straightened. Her eyes were bright in the way they got when she was holding something she knew mattered. "We need copies of the surveys for all of them." Cole looked at Douglas Pettit, who was already expressing through posture alone that copying 4 survey maps had been sufficient contribution to the afternoon. "Sir," Cole said, "we'll need surveys for the Henry property, the Caldwell property, and the Mercer property as well. Original county records pre-'80. Douglas Pettit looked at him. "Please," Emma added. Douglas Pettit went back into the depths of the records room with the energy of a man marching towards something he had not chosen. Cole turned to Emma. She was looking at him with something that surprised him, not the planning look, not the recalibrating look. Something softer than either. "Thank you," she said. "You would have asked him yourself." "I would have, but you said it faster." A pause. "You're good at reading what's needed." He held her gaze for a moment, one moment too long to be purely practical. "So are you." Emma looked back at her notebook and made an unnecessary additional notation that Cole was fairly certain was just something to do with her hands. He looked back at the survey map and pretended he hadn't noticed. They were in the records office for another 2 hours. By the time they rode out with a satchel full of copied surveys and notation pages, the sun was already beginning its descent, and the return ride was going to put them back at the Dawson Ranch close to dark. Emma didn't suggest they turn back early. Neither did Cole. They rode in the long amber light of the late afternoon, and somewhere past the halfway ridge, Emma began talking. Really talking. The kind of talking she didn't do in company. the kind that came out only when she'd been thinking long enough that the thoughts needed somewhere to go. "My father built that ranch alone," she said, "after my mother died. He was 41 years old and he had a 10-year-old daughter and a mortgage and a herd that wasn't big enough, and he kept going. He never once talked about quitting. Not once." She was quiet for a moment. "I learned every single thing I know about not quitting from watching him." "He know that?" Cole asked. "I tell him. He waves it off, says I would have been stubborn anyway." "He's probably right." "Probably." She smiled, brief real. "He's right about most things. He just doesn't always say them at the right moment." A pause. "He said something to me after you offered to come today, after you went to get the wagon." Cole waited. "He said, 'That man has been watching out for this family for 15 years, and too proud to admit why.'" She kept her eyes on the road ahead. "I didn't know what to say to that." "What did you say?" "I said, 'Papa, the fence posts.'" He laughed for the first time in about 3 weeks. Cole looked at the mountains ahead of them, the last light running gold along the ridgeline, and he thought about 15 years of knowing where her lamp was lit when he rode past in the dark without slowing down. 15 years of finding reasons to come by that were always about something practical. 15 years of a thing he hadn't let himself name because naming it meant wanting it, and wanting it meant the possibility of losing it, and he had already lost enough. "He's not wrong," Cole said. Emma turned to look at him. "Your father," Cole said. "He's not wrong." A silence. Not uncomfortable, not charged with anything unresolved. Just two people on horseback in the last of the light, with the truth sitting quietly between them for the first time in 15 years, not requiring anything immediate. "No," Emma said. "He usually isn't." They rode on. The trouble was waiting for them at the Caldwell property line. They saw it from the road, a group of men, not ranch hands, with the posture of people conducting business. They expected to be disputed. Frank Caldwell was standing in front of his gate, with his arms crossed, and his two older sons flanking him, and the man doing the talking had the same quality of city-dressed deliberateness as Gerald Harmon. Cole and Emma slowed without discussion. "Same operation," Cole said quietly. "Different property." Emma's voice had gone very even. "He's moving faster than I expected." They pulled up near the gate. Frank Caldwell looked up and something shifted in his expression. Relief, Cole thought, or the particular version of relief that looks like a man seeing reinforcements arrive when he wasn't sure any were coming. "Emma," Frank said. "Cole?" "Frank." Emma's eyes moved to the suited man. "I don't believe we've met." The man, younger than Harmon, with the energy of someone who'd been told he was persuasive, turned toward her with practiced composure. "Ma'am, this is a private property matter. I'm Emma Dawson. My family's property shares a boundary line with the Caldwell land." She reached into the satchel and produced the copied survey. "And based on the county records I've just retrieved, any acquisition claim on the eastern corridor that uses the Standard Valley map as its reference document is working from an incorrect property line. The original 1871 county survey establishes the Caldwell eastern boundary 14 yards east of the commonly referenced point." The man blinked. Frank Caldwell looked at Emma. Emma held the survey out, not aggressively, not theatrically, just with the calm steadiness of a woman who has done the work and knows what the work says. "You're welcome to verify it," she said. "The county records office will be open tomorrow morning. I'd encourage your employer's legal team to do so before submitting any formal acquisition documents, because if they're using the incorrect baseline, any documents already prepared are going to need substantial revision." A silence. The suited man looked at the survey. He did not take it. "I'll convey your concerns to Mr. Langley," he said. "They aren't concerns," Emma said. "They're facts. The boundary is where it is regardless of what Mr. Langley's maps say." The man nodded once stiffly, the nod of someone who has encountered a variable they didn't plan for, and gestured to the two men behind him. They mounted and rode. Frank Caldwell waited until they were out of earshot. Then he said in a voice that was slightly unsteady, "Emma, Lord Almighty, do you have your original land grant, Frank?" Somewhere. In the house. Get it out tonight. Compare it to this. She handed him the copied survey, and note any discrepancy you find. If your boundary references the tributary the same way the Dawson boundary does, you may have grounds to challenge any acquisition claim on the same basis. She held his gaze. You're not alone in this. Frank looked at her for a long moment. He was a big man. Frank Caldwell, broad-shouldered, weathered, and he had the look of a man who was not accustomed to needing help. But he took the survey copy with both hands, and he nodded. Neither are you, he said. Whatever you need, Emma, you say the word. Cole watched the exchange and felt something settle in his chest, not surprise exactly because he'd known who Emma Dawson was. But there was a difference between knowing a thing and watching it operate in the world, and watching Emma in this moment, calm, prepared, effective, generous, was something he was going to carry with him for a long time. They left the Caldwells with the survey copy and a standing offer. Riding back toward the Dawson property, Cole said, You want to hit the Henry place tomorrow? And the Mercer widow. Emma's voice was tired now, the productive tiredness of someone who'd done what they set out to do and was feeling the weight of it. And we need to talk to whoever else Langley has approached. I need to know the shape of the whole thing, not just the edges. You're building a case. I'm building a record. There's a difference. She paused. A case is what you take to court. A record is what you take to a public hearing where the court of opinion matters as much as the court of law. Cole considered this. You think it'll get to a hearing? I think Langley is counting on people being too scattered and too afraid to organize. I think if we can get every affected family to understand what their survey actually says versus what his team is claiming. She stopped, exhaled. I think we can make it very difficult for him to proceed quietly. Making things difficult for powerful men has a way of making powerful men unpleasant. I know. Emma. I know, Cole. Her voice was steady and tired and without fear, which was somehow more unsettling than if she'd been frightened. I'm not naive about what this could become, but I'm also not going to hand him the valley because he expected us to be too polite to push back. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, neither am I. She looked at him. Whatever this becomes, he said, you're not carrying it alone. The words came out plainer than he intended, plainer, and more direct than he was typically comfortable with. But he held her gaze while he said them and didn't take them back. Emma held his gaze in return. In the fading light, her expression was the particular kind of open that cost something to hold. You said that earlier too. Different words, same meaning. I meant it then as well. I know you did. A pause. That's the thing about you, Cole Walker. You mean what you say, every single time. She looked forward again. It's rarer than you'd think. They were almost back to the Dawson property when they saw the second wagon. Not Langley's men this time. This one was parked outside the gate with a woman in it, elegantly dressed, unmistakably out of place, with the particular posture of someone who was accustomed to arriving places and having those places adjust to her. Cole felt Emma go still beside him. Not with fear, but with the particular stillness of someone who has just recognized the shape of a new complication. The woman in the wagon was young mid-20s and beautiful in a way that was clearly aware of itself, and when she turned at the sound of their approach, her eyes moved first to Cole. They stayed on Cole. Mr. Walker, the woman said with the ease of someone who had been told his name and rehearsed the delivery. I was hoping I might catch you here. I'm Victoria Langley. My father speaks very highly of your property. Cole did not respond immediately. He was watching the way Victoria Langley's eyes had moved over Emma briefly dismissively with the particular quality of someone categorizing and discarding in the same motion. Emma had noticed. He knew she'd noticed because her posture had changed in the nearly imperceptible way it changed when she was making herself not react to something. Miss Langley, Cole said. This is Emma Dawson. This is her family's property. Victoria Langley smiled the smile of someone who understood the correction and was choosing not to receive it. Of course, Miss Dawson. The use of the name was technically polite and entirely dismissive. She returned to Cole. My father is hosting a dinner at the Cheyenne Hotel on Thursday. He'd very much like the opportunity to speak with the major landowners in the valley man to man about the opportunity he's offering. I do hope you'll consider attending. Man to man, Cole repeated. It's a business discussion. My father finds these conversations more productive in a brief pause, a precise smile, certain company. The silence that followed was the particular kind that has edges. Emma spoke before Cole could. Mr. Langley is welcome to send a formal written communication to any landowner he wishes to speak with, Emma said with a pleasantness that had titanium running through it. Including Mr. Walker. I'll make sure he receives it. A beat. Is there anything else we can help you with, Miss Langley? Victoria looked at Emma for the first time with genuine attention. The attention of someone who has just encountered resistance they didn't anticipate from a direction they didn't expect. Something moved behind her eyes. Not respect, not yet, but awareness. No, she said after a moment. I believe that covers it. She picked up her reins. Enjoy your evening, Ms. Dawson. She looked at Cole one more time. Mr. Walker? She turned the wagon and drove. Emma watched her go with an expression Cole couldn't fully read. Then she dismounted, tied her horse to the gatepost, and lifted the satchel from the saddle with precise, unhurried movements that told him she was working very hard to appear unhurried. Emma. I'm fine. I know you're fine. I also know what just happened. A wealthy man's daughter delivered a dinner invitation while making it clear she considers me furniture. Her voice was even. It's not the first time someone has looked at me that way, Cole. I assure you it won't register in the top 10. It shouldn't have happened. No, it shouldn't have. She turned and faced him, and her eyes were clear and direct and carrying something that had been carried quietly for a long time. But here's what I've learned about being looked at that way. It tells you everything about the person doing the looking and nothing at all about you. She held the satchel against her chest. What I care about right now is whether every family in this valley still has their land in 60 days. Victoria Langley's opinion of me is not on the list. Cole stood in front of her and felt something in his chest that he didn't have a word for yet. Something that was partly the useless anger of a man who wanted to say something that couldn't be unsaid to someone who had already left, and partly the particular kind of awe that comes from watching someone absorb a blow with grace and then immediately redirect toward what matters. She's wrong, he said, about everything she implied. I know she's wrong. Emma met his eyes. But it was kind of you to say it anyway. It's not kindness. Cole, I need you to stop calling things I mean kindness. He held her gaze. I mean what I say. You just said that yourself. A pause. The kind with weight in it. Yes, Emma said finally. I did. She turned and went inside to check on her father. Cole stood at the gate for a moment in the dark that had fully arrived while they'd been standing there. Thursday. Langley's dinner. Man to man. Cole had no intention of going to any dinner, but he had every intention of finding out exactly who Arthur Langley was, what he'd done in the territories to the north, and precisely how far he was willing to go. Because the look on Gerald Harmon's face at the creek and the efficiency of the operation he'd watched roll through the Caldwell property told him one thing clearly: Langley hadn't come to Wyoming to negotiate. He'd come to win, and he'd won before. The question was, what had stopped him anywhere? Whether anything had. Whether there was a crack in how he operated that a woman with a satchel full of county surveys and a man who meant what he said could find and press until something gave. Cole didn't know the answer to that yet. But he knew one thing. He knew Emma Dawson had looked a room full of discouraging realities in the face today and come home with more ammunition than she'd left with. And he knew that whatever was coming, whatever shape Langley's next move took, there was not a version of this where Cole Walker stood back and watched it happen from a practical distance. 15 years of practical distance. It was over. Cole didn't sleep. He told himself it was the planning. There was genuine planning to do real problems with real edges that needed thinking through, but honesty required him to admit that the planning was only part of it. The other part was Emma. The way she'd walked into her house without looking back, carrying everything quietly, the way she always carried everything, and the way he'd stood at the gate in the dark feeling completely inadequate to the size of what was building around both of them. He was up before 4. By the time gray light was pressing through the east window, he had already written down everything he knew about Arthur Langley from the Territory News over the past 3 years. Which parcels he'd acquired north of Casper, which families had sold, and which had been pressured into selling. And one name that appeared twice in connection with disputed claims, a lawyer named Garrett Poole based in Cheyenne, who had a reputation for finding legal angles that were technically defensible and practically devastating. If Langley had brought Poole to Wyoming, this wasn't going to stay at the level of courtesy documents and dinner invitations for long. He rode to the Dawson Ranch at first light. Emma was already at the kitchen table. The original land grant was spread in front of her alongside 3 of the copied surveys, and she had a second notebook open with 2 full pages of handwriting in it. Her father's bedroom door was closed. The coffee pot was on, and there were 2 cups on the table, one for her. One Cole realized that she'd set out before she heard his horse. She'd known he'd come early. "Sit down," she said without looking up. "Tell me what you found." He sat. He told her about Poole. Emma listened without interrupting, which was how she always listened completely, like whatever you were saying deserved the full architecture of her attention. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, then she put her pencil down. "If Poole is involved, this has already moved past the acquisition stage," she said. "He doesn't do acquisitions. He does enforcement. You know his work. I know his reputation. He filed the quiet title action that cleared the Henderson family off their land in Johnson County 2 years ago. Took him 11 weeks from first document to final order." She looked at the survey maps. "He's going to look for any irregularity in our deeds and use it as a foothold. Anything a missed signature, a boundary description that doesn't match the filed plat, a lapse in property tax payment." A pause. "Has your own deed ever been fully audited, Cole?" He thought about it honestly. "Not formally." "Mine either." She picked up her pencil again. "We need to fix that before Poole does it for us." That was how the next 2 weeks began. They rode out every morning. The Henrys, the Caldwells, the Mercer widow, 4 other families in the eastern corridor, whose names Cole supplied, and Emma organized into a list that became a schedule, that became a pattern of days that had a shape and a purpose he hadn't felt in years. Emma talked to the families. Cole assessed the physical boundaries, walked property lines, identified where the discrepancies were between what families believed they owned and what the 1871 surveys actually showed. Emma translated the discrepancies into language that was precise and documentable, and couldn't be argued with by someone who hadn't done the same work. They worked well together. That was the plain truth of it, and Cole was done pretending it surprised him. They thought in compatible ways. She moved fast and wide, building the large picture. He moved slow and deep, verifying the foundations. She caught things he missed because she was looking at the whole. He caught things she missed because he was looking at the parts. Together they didn't miss much. Jedediah Henry told them on the 4th day that a man had come to his gate the morning before and offered him 40 cents on the dollar for his east pasture. Just the east pasture, not the whole ranch. And when Jed had said no, the man had told him that the county was likely to reassess the property boundary in that area, and that the value might drop considerably before long. Emma's expression didn't change. "What did you say?" "I said he had until I counted to 5 to get off my property." Jed scratched the back of his neck. "I only got to 3. "Good. Don't engage with them again. Send any written communications directly to me." She opened her notebook. "The east pasture boundary, show me where the man was standing when he pointed to it." The Mercer widow was harder. Martha Mercer was 61 years old and had been running her late husband's ranch alone for 7 years, and she was frightened in the way that people who have been alone through hard things are frightened, not dramatically, but deep and quiet, like cold water that keeps rising. She had received not 1, but 3 separate visits from Langley's men. The last one had left a document on her kitchen table that she hadn't fully understood and was too proud to ask for help interpreting. Emma read the document at Martha's kitchen table without letting her expression show what she was reading. Cole watched Emma's face anyway. He saw the moment she found what she was looking for. A flicker quickly controlled of something that was closer to anger than anything Emma typically allowed herself. "Mrs. Mercer," Emma said, setting the document down carefully. "This is not a purchase offer. This is a quiet title filing. They're claiming a portion of your east boundary is legally unresolved due to a surveying error in your original deed." Martha Mercer's hands tightened in her lap. "Is it legally unresolved?" Emma looked at the survey copy she'd brought, looked at the filing, looked back at the survey. "No," she said, with a flatness that carried the full weight of certainty. "The error they're referencing is in their document, not your deed. Your boundary is exactly where your husband filed it." She closed her notebook. "I need you to trust me on something, Mrs. Mercer. Do not sign anything. Do not respond to this document yourself. Give it to me." "What will you do with it?" "I'm going to show it to every family in this valley," Emma said, "and then I'm going to show it to the county land commissioner because what this document attempts is not legal acquisition. It's fraud. And I want there to be a record of exactly when it arrived and exactly what it says." Martha Mercer looked at Emma for a long moment. Then she said, "Your mother would have been proud of you." Emma's face did something small and controlled, and then went steady again. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means a great deal to me." She took the document. On the walk back to the horses, Cole said nothing for a moment. Then, "How many of these have they filed?" "I don't know yet. But if they've filed one, they've filed others." Her voice was tight with controlled fury. "They're moving simultaneously on multiple properties, trying to overwhelm the response. If every family is dealing with their own fear and their own documents, nobody looks at the full picture. But you're looking at the full picture. That's why we have to keep moving." She put the document in the satchel. "Tomorrow, I want to check with the county clerk's office, not the records, the filings. I want to know every quiet title action filed in the past 60 days in the Eastern Corridor." Cole nodded. "I'll go tonight. I know the night clerk." Emma stopped walking. She turned to look at him with an expression that was simultaneously grateful and frustrated. Grateful for him, frustrated that she needed the help, which was a combination he'd come to recognize as specifically Emma. "You don't have to." "Emma." He said her name with the particular patience of a man who has said the same thing enough times that he hopes the saying of it will eventually be accepted as settled fact. "Stop finishing that sentence." A beat. "Fine," she said. He almost smiled. "That's the third time you've said fine and meant thank you." "The fourth." She turned back toward the horses. "I'm keeping count." He went to the county clerk that night and came back with a number that stopped him cold in the doorway of the Dawson kitchen where Emma and her father were sitting together after supper. 11, he said. Emma put down her coffee cup. 11 quiet title filings, Cole said. In 43 days, every one of them in the Eastern Corridor. Every one of them referencing the same surveying discrepancy as the document they left with Martha Mercer. Robert Dawson set down his coffee cup slowly. "They built this before they arrived," Emma said. It wasn't a question. "Poole must have been here 2 months ago," Cole said, quietly, pulling records identifying which properties had deed language vague enough to attack. He set his own notes on the table. "This isn't opportunistic, Emma. This is a coordinated legal campaign. They came here knowing exactly which properties they were going after and exactly which language they were going to use against them." The room was very quiet. Robert Dawson said, "How many families know about the others?" "None," Emma said. "That's the strategy. Keep each family isolated, dealing with their own fear. Make them think they're the only one, that maybe they have done something wrong, that maybe fighting back isn't worth it." "Then we change that," Robert said. He looked at his daughter steadily. "You know what needs to happen." "A meeting," Emma said. "All the families together, so everyone sees the whole picture at once." Cole watched her think it through, watched the planning move across her face, rapid and structured. Then she said, "Sunday, after church. The Henry barn is big enough. Frank Caldwell can spread the word." Cole said, I'll ride to the Caldwells tonight." Robert Dawson looked at Cole over the rim of his coffee cup with the expression of a man who was arriving at a conclusion he'd already suspected. "Son," he said, "have you eaten anything today?" Cole thought about it. Noon. Robert looked at Emma. Emma was already moving toward the stove without being asked. It was the most domestic moment of Cole's recent memory, and it landed somewhere in his chest with a warmth he wasn't prepared for and didn't know what to do with while standing in a kitchen in the middle of a crisis. He ate. He rode to the Caldwells. He got back to his own ranch close to midnight and lay in the dark for an hour before he slept, thinking about Garrett Poole and 11 quiet title filings and Emma's face in the Mercer kitchen when Martha Mercer mentioned her mother. The Sunday meeting drew 23 people to the Henry barn. Cole had expected 12. Emma had hoped for 15. 23 arrived, which told him that Frank Caldwell had not only spread the word, but had done it with enough conviction that people who hadn't planned to come changed their minds. Emma stood at the front of the room without notes. She didn't need them. She had everything in her head organized, sequenced, weighted by importance, and she delivered it the way she did everything, without performance, without false reassurance, and without softening the parts that needed to be heard hard. She explained the quiet title filings. She showed them Martha Mercer's document alongside the 1871 survey. She explained the discrepancy, explained how Poole had constructed the legal argument. And then, this was the moment. Cole watched the room change. She showed them that the same language appeared in all 11 filings. Word for word. Not 11 separate legal findings. One template applied 11 times to 11 different families who had each been told implicitly or explicitly that their situation was unique. The barn went very still. Then Frank Caldwell said, "They manufactured it." "The surveying error they're citing doesn't exist in the original county records," Emma said. "I've verified it against 4 separate historical surveys. What they've done is create a discrepancy on paper by referencing a property description that predates the 1871 survey without acknowledging the 1871 correction. It's not accidental. It requires deliberate selection of source documents." "That's fraud," said Jed Henry. "It is," Emma said. "But proving it requires a formal proceeding, and that requires someone to bring the evidence to a public hearing." "You," said Martha Mercer from the third row. It wasn't a question. Emma held the room's attention without flinching from it. "I'm willing to do that, but I need something from all of you first. I need every family to sign a sworn statement attesting to the timing and content of Langley's approaches to your property. I need the documents they left with you. And I need anyone who was present for those conversations to be willing to repeat what was said under oath if it comes to that." The silence that followed lasted long enough to matter. Then Robert Dawson, who had come despite Emma's instruction to rest, who was sitting in the back row with his coat buttoned against the morning chill, said in a voice that carried clearly through the barn, "I'll sign." And one by one, like something tipping, the rest of the room followed. Cole stood at the back wall and watched it happen, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, something that was not quite hope and not quite pride, but lived in the neighborhood of both as 23 people in a Wyoming barn decided collectively, and without anyone forcing them, that they weren't going to lose. Emma collected every signature herself. She shook every hand. When the last family had filed out and only Cole and Robert remained in the barn, Emma sat down for the first time in 2 hours on a hay bale and closed her eyes and breathed. Her father looked at her with a love that had no words adequate to it. Cole looked at her from across the space and felt it again, that thing he'd been feeling in pieces for 15 years and was only now allowing himself to feel whole. The full size of it. The full weight. He was in love with Emma Dawson. Completely. Without reservation. With the specific kind of certainty that came not from a single moment, but from 15 years of evidence accumulated without his consent. "Emma," Robert said softly, "you should rest. I need to organize the statements. Tomorrow." "Papa." "Tomorrow." His voice was gentle and firm in the way of fathers who have learned when to insist. "Tonight you've done enough." Emma opened her eyes. She looked at her father. She looked across the barn at Cole, and the look held the particular quality of exhaustion that was also somehow relief. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow." Cole rode home that night with the 23 signatures in Emma's notebook vivid in his mind, and a feeling in his chest that was warm and terrifying in equal measure because he knew with the same certainty he'd felt in the barn that whatever came next was going to be harder. He was right. The ambush happened 4 days later. Cole was moving cattle through the mountain pass, a 2-day drive he'd been putting off that couldn't wait any longer with the summer grazing window closing when 3 men stepped out of the tree line on the second morning. They weren't rustlers. Rustlers had a different energy, a furtive calculation. These men moved with the deliberateness of people who had been told exactly where to be and exactly what to do. "Mr. Walker," the one in front said. He had the broad, flat affect of a man who had done this before. "Mr. Langley wanted us to deliver a message." "Then deliver it." "He says the valley situation is getting complicated. He says complicated situations have a way of resolving more smoothly when certain influences step back." Cole looked at the 3 men. He looked at the terrain. He calculated the way a man calculates who has spent 35 years in mountains, where miscalculation costs more than time. "Tell Langley," Cole said, "that I don't step back." The first man nodded once, almost respectfully. "He figured you'd say that." What happened next took less than 2 minutes, and left Cole on the ground with a broken rib, a cut above his left eye that bled considerably, and a cattle drive that was going to be delayed because he needed to get himself off the mountain before the situation became worse. He got himself off the mountain. It took most of the day. He rode directly to the Dawson Ranch because it was 3 miles closer than his own, and because if he was honest, it was where he wanted to be. He pulled up to the gate as the sun was going down, and Emma came out of the house before he'd fully dismounted. She saw him from the window. He'd learn later, and recognized immediately from the way he was sitting the horse that something was wrong. She was at his side before his boots hit the ground. Cole, what happened?" "I'm all right." "You're not all right." Her hands were already on his face, tilting it toward what was left of the light, assessing the cut with the focused urgency of someone who had set aside every feeling in favor of immediate practical necessity. "Get inside, now." "Emma." "Now Cole." He got inside. Robert Dawson stood up from his chair and then sat back down when Emma pointed at him with a look that communicated clearly that additional people having health events was not something she was prepared to manage tonight. She cleaned the cut. She wrapped the rib efficiently firmly with the practiced movements of a woman who had doctored her share of ranch injuries over the years. Cole sat at the kitchen table and submitted to being cared for, which was not something he was naturally good at, and tried not to show how much the ribs hurt when he breathed. "How many?" Emma asked, working. "3. Langley's men." They said his name. Her hands didn't stop moving, but something in them changed, a tightness, a controlled fury that she was metabolizing into the work of bandaging. "He sent men to threaten you physically." "Sent men to deliver a message." The physical part was editorial. Cole, "I'm fine." "You have a broken rib." "It'll heal." Emma tied off the bandage and sat back and looked at him with an expression that was complicated in ways he didn't have the vocabulary to fully read. Fear, anger, something else underneath both that she was working to keep beneath the surface. "This changes things," she said. "It means we're close to something that frightens him. Men like Langley don't use muscle when they're winning. They use muscle when they're worried. Or when they want to warn you away from the hearing, which means the hearing is worth having." Emma was quiet for a moment. Her father was very quiet in his chair. The fire was going low. "Cole," Emma said, and her voice had come down to the register she used for the things that mattered most. "I need you to be honest with me right now. Always. Are you scared?" He looked at her steadily. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding. His rib protested every breath. 3 men in a mountain pass had delivered a message on behalf of a man who was accustomed to winning, and Cole Walker was sitting in Emma Dawson's kitchen being asked if he was scared. "Yes," he said. Emma blinked. She hadn't expected that he could tell. "I'm scared of what happens to you," he said. "If we push this to the hearing and it goes wrong. I'm scared of what happens to your father's health if this drags into winter. I'm scared of what Langley's willing to do when legal pressure doesn't work." He held her eyes. "I'm not scared of 3 men in a mountain pass, but I'm scared of the things I can't stand in front of." The kitchen was very quiet. Robert Dawson cleared his throat softly and said he thought he'd go to bed, and the gentle tact of it was so precisely calibrated to the moment that Cole could have thanked him. Emma stayed at the table. She was looking at Cole with the look the one that had been at the creek at the records office in the Mercer kitchen, but larger now, more unguarded, carrying the full weight of whatever she'd been holding quietly and carefully since the afternoon beside the water when she'd told him the truth. "The things you can't stand in front of," she repeated softly. "Yeah, Cole Walker." Her voice was very low. "Do you understand what you are to this valley? To these families who signed that paper because you were at the back of the room?" She leaned forward slightly. "Do you understand what you are to me?" He didn't answer because she wasn't finished. "You have spent 15 years helping people quietly, without asking for recognition, without expecting anything back. You drove fence posts into my south line because I needed them. You rode 3 hours to a county records office because I needed the surveys. You got ambushed on a mountain pass because Langley is afraid of what we're building together." She stopped, steadied herself. "And you sat down in that chair and told me you were scared not for yourself, for me, for my father, for people you don't owe anything to." Her eyes were bright. "That is not," she said, "a man who has any business believing love isn't meant for him." Cole went very still. He hadn't said that out loud. Not to her. Not in those words. "Your father," he started. "My father has been saying it to me for 2 years," Emma said. "I've been waiting for you to figure it out yourself." A pause. "I was starting to think I might be waiting quite a while longer." Outside, the Wyoming night was fully dark, and somewhere to the north, Arthur Langley was preparing his next move, and there were 11 families depending on what happened at a public hearing that hadn't been scheduled yet, and Cole Walker was sitting in a kitchen with a broken rib and a cut above his eye. He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. Emma looked down at their hands, then up at his face. "We're going to finish this," he said. "The hearing, the evidence, all of it." "Yes," she said. "We are." And then, she said quietly, and the word held everything neither of them had said yet, and all the time they'd lost, and all the time that was still ahead. "We'll have the rest of the conversation." His hand stayed over hers. Outside, the wind came off the mountains and moved through the dark, and neither of them spoke, and it was enough. For now it was enough. But Cole knew, with the cold clarity of a man who has just been reminded that powerful people do not stay patient when their plans are interrupted, that the hearing was coming fast, and what waited on the other side of it was either everything or nothing. And 3 men in a mountain pass had just told him Langley knew it too. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. Emma had 12 days. She used all of them. Cole watched her work with the focused intensity of someone who understood at a cellular level that the difference between winning and losing this fight was not passion. Passion, they had plenty of, but precision. Precision in the evidence. Precision in the sequencing. Precision in the language she chose to describe what Langley's team had done, because she knew the room she was walking into, and she knew that the men sitting in judgment of the evidence would be looking for any reason to dismiss it as the complaint of an emotional woman who didn't understand how land law worked. She was going to give them no such reason. The kitchen table disappeared under documents. The original Dawson land grant. The 11 quiet title filings organized chronologically. The 1871 county surveys annotated in Emma's precise handwriting. The sworn statements from 23 Valley families. Martha Mercer's fraudulent filing alongside the original deed that disproved it. A timeline Emma had constructed showing that Garrett Poole had made a quiet trip to the county records office 8 weeks before the first courtesy document arrived at any ranch gate proof documented by the clerk's sign-in log, which Emma had thought to request that the legal strategy had been built in advance. That last piece had come from Cole. He'd remembered the night clerk mentioning an out-of-town attorney requesting historical survey records in early June, and he'd gone back and asked specifically, and the clerk, a methodical man named Patterson, who believed in complete record-keeping with the conviction of a man who had been proven right about it before, had produced a sign-in log with Garrett Poole's name and the date in black ink. When Cole put it on the kitchen table, Emma had looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "This is the spine of everything." "How so?" "Because it proves intent, not error, not aggressive acquisition, deliberate premeditated fraud." She looked up. Poole came here and identified the properties before Langley's men ever knocked on a single door. He built the false surveying argument specifically for these deeds. That's not a business dispute. That's a conspiracy. Cole looked at the log. "Can you prove conspiracy at a county land hearing?" "I can prove enough that the land commissioner can't ignore it and the county prosecutor will have to." She was already writing. "The hearing is where I establish the public record. The prosecution happens after." Cole's ribs still hurt when he breathed too deep. He'd been sleeping less than he should, and working more than he should, and Emma had told him twice to rest, and he had told her twice that rest could wait, and she had accepted this without arguing, which told him she was too deep in her own work to have the argument properly, which was fine, because he didn't intend to rest anyway. The night before the hearing, Robert Dawson had a bad night. Cole heard about it the next morning when he arrived at the Dawson Ranch at 6 and found Emma standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee she hadn't drunk and the particular stillness of someone who had been awake since 2. "He's all right," she said before Cole could ask. "The doctor came at 4. He said it was strain. He needs 3 days of complete rest and no excitement." She looked at the counter. "Today is the hearing." Cole set down his hat. "Does he know? I told him after the doctor left. He said." She stopped. Her voice had gone careful in the way it went careful when she was carrying something she didn't want to drop in front of anyone. "He said, 'Emma, your mother watched me build this ranch from nothing with both hands. You go show them what Dawson hands can do.'" The kitchen was very quiet. "Emma," Cole said, "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're frightened and exhausted, and your father is sick, and you're walking into a room full of men who are expecting you to fail." He waited until she looked at him. "None of that changes what you're about to do in that room. I just want you to know that I know." She looked at him for a moment, with the look that had no guard left in it. "Thank you," she said. "4th time," he said. Despite everything, she almost smiled. 5th. They rode into town together. The county land commissioner's hearing room held 60 people and had 83 in it by the time the session was called to order. Cole hadn't expected that. He'd expected the affected families, a few officials, Langley's legal team. He hadn't expected ranchers from the Northern Valley, who had no direct stake, or the editor of the county paper, who sat in the 3rd row with a notebook open from the start, or the 2 men in territorial government suits, whose presence nobody explained and everybody noticed. Langley was there. Cole saw him for the first time, a compact, controlled man in his 50s with the bearing of someone who had won enough times to have confused winning with being right. He sat beside Garrett Poole at the front left table with the composed assurance of a man attending a formality. Victoria Langley was beside him. She saw Cole enter and held his gaze for a moment, with an expression that was difficult to read, something in it that might have been warning, might have been apology, might have been neither. Cole looked away. Emma took her place at the front right table. She set her documents in front of her in the order she'd organized them the night before, 12 years of legal filings at the county level, because Emma had spent the last week reading every public land hearing transcript she could obtain, learning the form, learning what commissioners responded to and what they dismissed. She had prepared for this the way she prepared for everything completely. Garrett Poole looked at her across the room with the expression of a man, who has just noticed something he hadn't planned for and is deciding whether it matters. Cole read the decision in Poole's posture. He'd decided it didn't matter. That was his first mistake. Commissioner Harold Briggs opened the session with the standard formalities, and Poole went first. He was good. Cole had to give him that. Poole presented the surveying discrepancy argument with the smooth efficiency of a man who had delivered it many times and had refined it to the point where it sounded like settled fact rather than constructed fiction. He cited statutes. He cited precedents. He produced maps. Not the 1871 surveys, newer ones, the ones his team had selectively sourced to support the discrepancy, and walked through them with the ease of a man who controlled the information in the room. Several people in the audience were nodding. Cole watched Emma. She was writing. Not reacting, not visibly affected by any of it. Writing. Noting specific points, specific citations, specific map references with the focused calm of someone who had already heard everything being said and knew exactly where each piece fit in the architecture she was about to dismantle it with. When Poole finished, Commissioner Briggs turned to the right table. "Ms. Dawson, you may present." Emma stood. The room had a particular quality of silence, not respectful silence, not yet, but the silence of people waiting to see something fail with a kind of preemptive certainty that Cole recognized and hated. The kind of silence that said, "We'll hear her out. But we know how this goes." Emma said, "Commissioner Briggs, members of this proceeding, I'd like to begin with a date. June the 9th, 1889. She paused to let the date sit. That is the date that Mr. Garrett Poole, attorney for Arthur Langley's development interests, signed the County Records Office visitor log while reviewing historical survey documents for the Eastern Valley Corridor. She produced the log copy and set it on the commissioner's table. This is 7 weeks before the first courtesy document appeared at any ranch gate in this valley. I'd like the record to reflect that the legal strategy Mr. Poole has just presented was not a response to a discovered surveying irregularity. It was constructed in advance of any acquisition approach. The room's silence changed quality. Poole's expression didn't move, but he uncrossed his legs and recrossed them, and Cole, who had been watching him the entire time, noted it. Emma continued. She moved through the evidence the way she'd organized it. Not rushing, not performing, simply presenting one documented fact after another in a sequence that built with the quiet inevitability of water finding its way downhill. The 1871 surveys against Poole's sourced maps. The specific language in all 11 quiet title filings, identical word for word, against the 11 separate deed documents they supposedly addressed, each of which used different boundary descriptions that made the identical language impossible to apply accurately to all of them. Martha Mercer's filing with the surveying error that didn't exist in any county record placed side by side with Poole's own map selection from the records office visit. She put the sworn statements on the commissioner's table, all 23. She said, "These are statements from the families of the Eastern Valley Corridor. Each one documents the timing and content of approaches made by Mr. Langley's representatives. I draw the Commission's attention to the consistent pattern each family was approached individually, and given the implicit understanding that their situation was unique. No family was informed that 11 simultaneous quiet title filings had been prepared. The effect, and I would argue the intent, was to prevent the affected families from recognizing the coordinated nature of the campaign and organizing a collective response." Commissioner Briggs was reading. He had been reading for several minutes, which was the first real indication that the room was shifting. Then Emma said, "I'd like to call a witness." Poole stood. "Commissioner, this is a land hearing, not a trial. Witness testimony is, the procedural guidelines for county land hearings in Wyoming Territory allow sworn witness statements to be entered by either party," Emma said without looking at Poole. She had memorized the procedural guidelines. Of course she had. "I'm not calling a witness to the stand. I'm entering a sworn statement from the county records clerk, Mr. Thomas Patterson, attesting to the specific documents Mr. Poole reviewed on June 9th and the date of that review." She set Patterson's sworn statement on the table. Poole sat down. The room was very quiet now. Cole felt the shift not in any single person, but in the aggregate, the way a crowd's attention coheres around something it didn't expect. The editor in the third row was writing without stopping. The two men in territorial government suits were leaning together, talking quietly. And then Emma did something Cole hadn't anticipated. She turned and addressed the room directly, not the commissioner, the room. "The families in this valley did not come here today because they are difficult," she said. "They came because they were told through forged legal documents and manufactured surveying discrepancies and deliberate isolation of their individual situations that the land their families built was not legally theirs. They were told this by a coordinated legal operation that was designed before a single one of them was approached by an attorney who drove out from Cheyenne and spent a day in our county records office building the architecture of a fraud." She paused. "These families are not asking for extraordinary protection. They are asking for the law to mean what it says. They are asking for their deeds to be read as written. They are asking for the county to recognize that what has been filed against them in the past 43 days does not meet the legal standard for quiet title action, because the surveying discrepancy it relies upon does not exist in any verified historical record." She let that land. Then she sat down. The room erupted. Not dramatically, this wasn't a courtroom drama. But the 60-some people in that space all started talking at once, which created a noise that Commissioner Briggs had to gavel down twice before it subsided. Cole could see from the back of the room that several of the ranchers who'd come without direct stake were now talking with the families who had one, and the exchange had the particular energy of people who had just understood something they hadn't understood when they walked in. Poole was speaking to Langley in low, rapid tones. Langley's face was controlled, but something had moved behind it. Not fear, not yet, but the first genuine recalculation Cole had seen from him. Victoria Langley was not looking at her father. She was looking at Emma. Her expression, for the first time since Cole had encountered her, contained something that wasn't calculation or dismissal. It was, he thought, and he could have been wrong, something closer to recognition. Commissioner Briggs called for a 30-minute recess. During those 30 minutes, 3 things happened. The first was that the county prosecutor, who had been sitting in the back row and whom Cole had not noticed until this moment, walked up to the commissioner's table and had a conversation that Cole couldn't hear, but that lasted 11 minutes and ended with Briggs nodding. The second was that one of the men in territorial government suits approached Emma at the front table and introduced himself as an agent of the Territorial Land Office and asked her a series of questions about the scope and documentation of the coordinated filing strategy and took careful notes. The third was that Garrett Poole left the building. He simply walked out during the recess. His coat, his documents, his client. One of Langley's men came back in to collect the documents Poole had left on the table, and that was it. Cole watched the door close and felt something settle in the room that was not victory, not yet, but the specific absence of opposition. When the recess ended and Commissioner Briggs reconvened Langley's remaining representative, a younger attorney, who had the specific pallor of a man who had just been handed a situation he had not prepared for, requested a 30-day continuance. Emma was on her feet before the man finished speaking. "Commissioner, a continuance serves no purpose except to extend the period during which 11 quiet title filings remain active against the properties of Eastern Valley families. The documentation before this commission is complete. The evidence has been entered. If the Langley party requires 30 days to respond to the evidence, I would suggest that speaks to the quality of the evidence rather than the need for additional time." Briggs looked at the younger attorney. The younger attorney looked at his documents. "The request for continuance is denied," Briggs said. "We'll proceed." What followed took 2 hours and was to Cole's eyes less a proceeding than a formality. Briggs reviewed the evidence with 2 deputy commissioners. The Territorial Land Office agent remained at the table and asked questions that each time pushed the record further toward the conclusion that what Poole had constructed was not legally defensible. The county prosecutor said in official language that his office would be reviewing the filings for potential criminal referral. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Commissioner Briggs voided all 11 quiet title filings on the grounds that they were based on a surveying discrepancy that could not be verified in any primary historical record, and that the pattern of simultaneous filings suggested coordination inconsistent with good faith legal action. He referred the matter to the county prosecutor for review. He ordered all affected property deeds restored to their original recorded status. He thanked Emma Dawson for the quality of her documentation. The room did not erupt the way rooms erupt in stories. What happened was quieter and more real than that. A collective exhale, people turning to each other. Martha Mercer putting her hand over her mouth. Frank Caldwell's oldest son putting his arm around his father's shoulders. Jed Henry shook his head slowly like a man confirming something he'd almost stopped believing. Cole stood at the back of the room and watched Emma accept handshakes and embraces from 23 people whose land had been handed back to them by 4 hours of work she had done in 12 days without a single complaint about the difficulty of it. He watched her be gracious and warm and genuine with every single one of them. He watched her make sure Martha Mercer understood specifically clearly what the ruling meant for her property. He watched her deflect credit toward the families. You came, you signed, that mattered, with the characteristic Emma Dawson insistence on distributing what belonged to her. He waited. When the room had mostly cleared, and only a few clusters of conversation remained, Emma walked toward him through the emptying space, and Cole watched her come with the particular feeling of a man who has seen something extraordinary and knows he is not going to find adequate words for it. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him with eyes that were tired and bright simultaneously. "Well," she said. "Well," he said. A pause. "You were right," she said. "About Poole. About the sign-in log. You built everything else. We built everything else." She said it simply without deflection, which was new. Emma accepting the shared credit instead of redirecting it. He noticed. "Your father," Cole said. "He needs to hear." "I know. I'm going now." She picked up her satchel and then stopped. She looked at him with the expression that had no guard, the one that only appeared when the work was done and the practical had been dealt with, and there was nothing left between them but the truth. "Cole." "Yeah." "Come with me." It wasn't quite a question. It was somewhere between a question and an assumption stated with the particular confidence of a woman who had spent the last 12 days understanding, in a new and specific way, that this man was where she wanted him present beside her in the work and outside it. "Yes," Cole said. They walked out together into the late afternoon, the town moving around them in its ordinary way, horses and voices and the smell of dust and summer heat, and Cole felt the day settling into something he was going to carry for a long time. Not the victory, though the victory mattered. Not the evidence, or the commissioner's ruling, or Garrett Poole walking out a door. What he was going to carry was Emma Dawson at that front table standing up in a room full of people who expected her to fail and doing the thing she'd come to do completely precisely, without apology, without performance, and then turning at the end to make sure Martha Mercer understood. That was the thing. That was always the thing with Emma. They rode back toward the Dawson Ranch with the summer evening coming on around them, and the valley spread out below the ridge in the long amber light, and every ranch they passed. Henry Caldwell. Mercer, the others, sat solid on its land, the way it was supposed to, the way it was going to keep sitting. Emma rode beside him without speaking for a long while. Then she said, "My father is going to say something embarrassing. Probably. He's going to say he knew all along. He did know all along." Emma looked at him sideways. "I'm aware. That's what will make it embarrassing." A pause. "He's also going to ask when you're coming to Sunday dinner. He's been working up to asking for 3 weeks." Cole looked at the road ahead. "What are you going to tell him?" Emma was quiet for a moment. The horses moved steadily beneath them. The valley held its last light. "I was going to tell him," she said, "that you'd probably need to be asked properly." Cole turned his head and looked at her. Emma looked back at him with eyes that were clear and warm, and entirely without the careful guard she'd spent 15 years maintaining, and the evening light was doing something to the expression on her face that made him feel the full weight of every year he'd spent not looking directly at this. "Consider yourself asked," she said. Cole held her gaze for a long moment. "Sunday," he said. "Sunday," she agreed, and they rode on through the valley that they had helped save toward a house where a man was waiting to hear that the land he'd built with his hands was still his, and the conversation that had been paused at a creek on a hot summer afternoon was finally fully ready to begin. But 3 miles back in the room they'd just left, Arthur Langley was speaking to his remaining attorney in the tone of a man who had lost a battle and had not yet decided he'd lost the war. And the Territorial Land Office agent was making notes that were going to reach Cheyenne within the week. And Garrett Poole, wherever he'd gone, had left behind a trail of documentation that had a name on it and a date, and a county sign-in log that was now part of the public record. The Valley had won the day. What came after the day was going to depend on whether winning the day was enough. Cole thought about the territorial agent's questions, about the county prosecutor's careful language, about the way Commissioner Briggs had thanked Emma specifically by name for the quality of her documentation, which was not something commissioners typically did. He thought about what Emma had said at the kitchen table weeks ago about the difference between a case and a record. She'd built a record that was now in the hands of people with more authority than a county land commissioner. Cole allowed himself for the first time since the morning in the mountains to believe that this might actually be finished. He allowed himself that for about 4 miles. Then he let it go, because a man who has survived 35 Wyoming winters knows that the moment you decide something is finished is precisely the moment it reminds you it isn't. For now, though, Emma was beside him, and the valley was intact, and Sunday was coming. That was enough. That was, in fact, quite a lot. Sunday dinner came and went, and then another after that. Nobody announced it. Nobody made a formal arrangement. It simply became the shape of the week, Cole arriving at the Dawson Ranch on Sunday afternoon with whatever the ranch had produced that was worth bringing Robert Dawson, asking pointed questions about cattle prices that were really questions about intentions. Emma cooking enough for 3 people, without being asked whether there would be 3 people, and the evenings ending late with the fire burning low, and the conversation running easily in the way that conversations run when people have stopped being careful with each other. Cole had stopped being careful with Emma somewhere around the 3rd Sunday. He couldn't have said exactly when. It wasn't a decision so much as an accumulation, the way the creek bank accumulates silt gradually, without announcement, until one day the shape of the bank is different, and you understand it's been changing for a long time, Robert Dawson noticed. Robert Dawson had the grace not to say anything about it, which Cole appreciated, though the older man's expression on Sunday evenings had taken on the specific quality of a man watching something he'd predicted come true, and exercising considerable restraint in not saying so. The Territorial Land Office moved faster than anyone expected. 6 weeks after the hearing, a federal agent arrived in the county with papers that had Arthur Langley's name on them and the territorial prosecutor's seal below it. Garrett Poole had been located in Denver, where he had apparently made the mistake of filing a nearly identical quiet title campaign against a set of ranchers in Colorado who had not had an Emma Dawson to organize their response, but who had a territorial judge who recognized Poole's template when he saw it and had been looking for grounds to act. The Wyoming documentation, Emma's documentation, the 23 sworn statements, the sign-in log, the annotated surveys had provided those grounds. Cole heard it from Frank Caldwell, who heard it from the county clerk, who heard it from the federal agent himself. He rode to the Dawson Ranch that evening without planning to. Emma was at the kitchen table when he arrived. Her father was in his chair. Cole came in and stood in the doorway and said, "Poole's been charged, federal." Robert Dawson closed his eyes briefly. Emma set down her pen. "And Langley?" she asked. "Named as co-conspirator. The agent's still building the case, but—" Cole looked at her steadily. "It's over, Emma. The valley is over. Whatever comes next is someone else's courtroom." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she did something Cole had never seen her do in the entire arc of everything they'd been through together. She put her face in her hands. Not crying, or maybe crying just a little, just briefly, but mostly simply absorbing the weight of what it meant to have carried something hard for a long time and to feel it finally set down. Robert Dawson got up from his chair slowly, carefully, the way he moved now, and put his hand on his daughter's shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Cole stood in the doorway and felt the privacy of the moment and stayed very still inside it, because some things don't need a third voice. After a moment, Emma looked up. Her eyes were bright. "Good," she said. "That was all. Just good." Cole nodded. "Good." Robert Dawson looked at Cole over his daughter's head with an expression that communicated in the compressed language of men who don't use many words, something that sounded like, "Well, are you going to get on with it?" Cole looked at Emma. Emma was already picking up her pen because she was Emma, and the moment of vulnerability had been acknowledged and processed, and she was ready to move forward. But her hand wasn't entirely steady on the pen, and she knew he could see that, and she let him see it, which was its own kind of statement. "Stay for supper," she said without looking up. "I plan to," Cole said. Robert Dawson sat back down with the expression of a man whose work in one important respect was done. The Harvest Festival had been a valley tradition for 20 years, held beside the creek on the first Saturday of October, when the summer heat had broken and the season's work was behind them, and there was enough reason to gather that nobody needed an excuse. This year, the gathering had an additional quality, something that wasn't quite celebration and wasn't quite relief, but was both of those things combined with the particular warmth of people who had stood together through something hard and come out the other side intact. 23 families, every one of them there. Martha Mercer had brought 3 pies which Cole privately considered an act of joy expressed in pastry. Jed Henry's youngest daughter was playing fiddle with 2 of the Caldwell boys, and the music had the loose, cheerful energy of people who were playing because they wanted to, rather than because they were supposed to. Frank Caldwell was laughing at something Robert Dawson had said, the full-bodied laugh of a man whose east pasture was still his, and who hadn't laughed like that in months. Robert Dawson was having a good day. He'd been having more of them since the hearing, since the federal charges, since the Sunday dinners had become a fixed point in the week's structure. The doctor had said the stress reduction was measurable. Actually measurable, the kind of thing you could see in a man's color, and his breathing, and the way he moved. Cole thought the Sunday dinners helped too, but he didn't say that, because Robert Dawson would have given him a look that was too knowing to be comfortable. Emma was moving through the gathering the way she always moved through groups of people, not at the center of attention, but somehow present everywhere, making sure Martha Mercer had a place to sit, making sure Jed Henry's wife knew the fiddle playing was exceptional, making sure the children had enough of what they wanted and the older folks had chairs. Giving without accounting for it, the way she'd always given, the way Cole had watched her give for 15 years before he understood what he was watching. He'd been watching her all evening. She knew it. She didn't say anything about it, but she knew it. He could tell by the occasional sideways glance, the small contained smile that appeared and disappeared when she thought he wasn't looking closely enough to catch it. He was always looking closely enough. At some point, Frank Caldwell appeared at Cole's elbow with 2 cups of something warm and pressed one into his hand. "You going to stand over here watching all night?" Frank said. "Or are you going to go talk to her?" Cole looked at him. "I've been talking to her," Cole said. "Extensively. For months. Talking about land law and county surveys doesn't count." Frank took a drink from his cup. "I'm just saying, some of us have been watching you 2 circle each other since approximately 1883, and it's getting to be a long time." 83, Cole said. "That's specific. The year you drove fence posts into her south line without asking." Frank shrugged. "She told my wife. My wife told me. That's how these things work." He looked at Cole with the calm directness of a man who has weathered enough hard things to have no patience for unnecessary delay. "She saved our land, Cole. She did what none of the rest of us had the first idea how to do. And then she went home and made sure her father ate and slept and didn't worry himself to death." He paused. You know what kind of person does that. Cole was quiet. The kind worth not waiting on, Frank said. He walked away. Cole stood with his warm cup and the fiddle music and the sound of 23 families being whole and intact on a Saturday evening in October, and he looked across the gathering at Emma Dawson, who was laughing at something Martha Mercer had just said. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind she didn't perform. And he made a decision that wasn't really a decision so much as an acknowledgement of something he'd already decided without quite saying so to himself. He walked across the gathering toward her. Martha Mercer saw him coming first. Her expression did something that was equal parts warmth and deliberate discretion, and she said something quietly to Emma and excused herself with the tact of a woman who had raised 4 children and understood timing. Emma turned as Cole reached her. "Frank said something to you," she said immediately. "Frank said several things to me." "Was it embarrassing?" "Accurate," Cole said, "which is sometimes the same thing." Emma looked at him with the expression that had no guard, the one he'd first seen fully at the creek, that had appeared and disappeared and appeared again, across the weeks, that was clearer now, and more settled, like something that had stopped needing to be careful about itself. "Walk with me," Cole said. Emma glanced back at the gathering. The instinctive check of a woman who had spent years making sure everyone else was settled before she allowed herself anything, and Cole watched her make the conscious decision to let it go. To let someone else notice if Martha needed a chair. To let someone else keep track. "All right," she said. They walked. The creek was a few minutes from the gathering, and the sound of the fiddle followed them a little way, and then fell behind. And the evening was cool and clear, and the kind of October night that smelled like the end of something and the beginning of something at the same time. Cole knew where he was going. He hadn't planned it, or rather, he hadn't consciously planned it, but his feet knew, and when they stopped, they were standing at the exact place where the fence ran close to the creek bank, where the post anchors had been driven in during a hot summer afternoon that felt like a year ago and also like yesterday. Emma recognized it immediately. She went quiet beside him. "You said you meant what you said," Cole started. "I did. And you said you'd been waiting." "I had." "I need you to know," Cole said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended, the way it always came out when something mattered enough to strip the smoothness from it, "that I wasn't waiting because I didn't feel it. I was waiting because I was afraid of what it meant to feel it. Because the last time I let myself want something, the ranch, the life I'd built, the drought took most of it, and I rebuilt it alone, and somewhere in the rebuilding, I decided alone was safer than the alternative." Emma was very still beside him. "And then you looked at me," he said, "in the middle of a hot afternoon with mud on your boots, and you said 7 words, and I understood that I'd been building the wrong thing for years." "Cole, I'm not finished." He turned to face her fully. "I understand now that 15 years of standing a few steps away from you and finding practical reasons to come by wasn't practicality. It was me knowing somewhere underneath the practicality that this was the thing worth protecting, even if I was too much of a coward to call it by its name." He held her gaze. "I'm calling it by its name now." Emma's eyes were bright in the October dark. "You said that day," Cole continued, "that any cowboy would be lucky to love you. You said it back at me. You were correcting me." "I was agreeing with you," she said, "from a specific angle." "You were hoping it would be me." "I was hoping it would be you." No hesitation, no guard. Just the plain truth stated the way she stated everything she believed completely. Cole reached into his coat pocket. He'd had it for 3 weeks. He'd gotten it from a jeweler in town the week after the third Sunday dinner on a Tuesday afternoon when he had no particular reason to be in town, except that he'd been in town and the jeweler's window had a ring in it that was simple and well-made and not ostentatious, and he'd stood outside the window for approximately 4 minutes before going in, which was 3 minutes and 50 seconds longer than he needed. He held it out. It caught what light there was, moon and distant firelight, and it was exactly what it was, no more, no less. Emma looked at it. She looked at him. "Emma Dawson," Cole said. "I have driven fence posts into your south line without asking. I have brought you produce during winter without being invited. I have stood at the back of rooms while you did extraordinary things and been every single time the most grateful man in the building." He paused. "I am not a man who knows how to say elegant things, but I know how to show up. I know how to mean what I say. And I am asking you right now clearly, and without any additional waiting, if you will marry me." Emma looked at the ring. She looked at his face. She said, "You drove those fence posts in because you knew I needed them." "Yes." "And you didn't ask because you knew I'd say I could manage." "Yes." "And you went to the county records office because you understood that my surveying discrepancy was the spine of the case before I'd said so out loud." "Emma, I'm not deflecting," she said. "I'm making a point." She reached out and closed her fingers around the ring and around his hand at the same time, and her grip was warm and certain and completely without hesitation. "The point is that I have been watched and understood and shown up for and protected, not in spite of my competence, but alongside it by the same man for 15 years. And that man is standing in front of me at the exact spot where I told him the truth, and he is finally saying the thing out loud." She looked up at him. "Yes, Cole Walker. It was always going to be yes." Cole released a breath he felt like he'd been holding since June. He slid the ring onto her finger. Emma looked at it for a moment, one quiet moment, private hers, and then she looked up at him with eyes that were clear and certain, and carrying every year of the 15 years and the full weight of what came next, all of it without fear. He kissed her, briefly, solidly, the way he did everything without ornamentation entirely meant. When they walked back toward the gathering, Frank Caldwell saw them first. His face did the thing faces do when something long-awaited finally happens, and the relief of it is greater than the person expected. He said nothing. He simply put 2 fingers in his mouth and produced a whistle of the kind that carries considerable distance. Heads turned. Martha Mercer saw Emma's hand first. Her expression collapsed into something so warm it was almost painful to witness, and she said, "Oh, my dear girl," in a voice that carried, and that was the end of any pretense of quiet announcement. Robert Dawson was sitting in a chair near the fire, with a blanket across his knees, and Cole watched Emma cross toward him quickly, the way she moved toward her father, when something mattered, and kneel beside his chair and take his hands. And Robert Dawson looked at his daughter's face, and his eyes went very bright, and he said something Cole couldn't hear from the distance. Emma laughed, full and unguarded. Robert looked up across the gathering and found Cole, and the look between them was brief and complete. The look of 2 men who have understood each other for a long time and are now formally and finally on the same side of the same thing. Cole nodded. Robert Dawson nodded back. The fiddle started again, faster. Celebratory, the Caldwell boys having picked up the energy of the moment and run with it, and the gathering shifted into something looser and warmer and more fully itself, the way celebrations do when they acquire a real reason to celebrate. Cole stood at the edge of it and watched. He watched Emma laugh with Martha Mercer and accept an embrace from Jed Henry's wife. He watched Frank Caldwell shake his hand so firmly it tested the healed rib. He watched Robert Dawson sit straighter in his chair with the specific posture of a man whose burden has been redistributed in the best possible way. He watched 23 families who still had their land gathered beside a creek on a cool October evening, because a woman with a satchel full of county surveys had refused to let a powerful man win. He thought about the day it had started, the hot summer afternoon, the mud on Emma's boots, the 7 words that had cracked 15 years of careful distance open in a single sentence. He thought about the records office, and the Mercer kitchen, and the mountain pass, and the kitchen table at midnight, and the hearing room where Emma had stood in front of a room full of doubt and done the work anyway. He thought about what it was to know someone. Not the surface of them. The actual them, the way they thought, the way they carried hard things, the way they moved through the world and left it better than they found it without accounting for the leaving. He thought, I have known this woman for 15 years, and I have not been bored for a single day of them, and I am not going to be bored for a single day of what comes next. Emma looked up from across the gathering and found him exactly where she expected to find him, at the edge of things, watching present. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she tilted her head slightly in the direction of the fire, the gathering, the noise and warmth of it. Come here. Cole walked toward her. He walked toward Emma Dawson through the sound of fiddles and laughter, and 23 families whole on their own land, and the October night was cold and clear above them, and the creek ran beside them the same way it had always run, indifferent to the years and the difficulty, and the distance finally closed. He reached her side. She put her hand through his arm, naturally, without ceremony, the way you put your hand through the arm of a person who has been yours for a long time, and is finally acknowledged as such. They stood together in the warmth of it. And Cole Walker, who had spent 35 years believing that love was not meant for men like him, understood at last that he had been exactly wrong, that it had been meant for him all along, and that it had been standing a few steps away from him, patient and steady, and waiting for 15 years. Some distances are not crossed in a single step. Some of them are crossed in 15 years of showing up, of meaning what you say, of driving fence posts into a south line because someone needs them, and you know it, even when they haven't asked, and then finally standing at a creek in October with a ring in your hand and the courage to call the thing by its name. Cole had crossed the distance. Emma had been waiting at the other end. And that, not the land, not the victory, not the commissioner's ruling, or the federal charges, or any of the extraordinary things that had happened in the months between the creek and this fire. That was the thing worth everything. That was the thing that lasted.